Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for lost true stories of Southwest pioneers, fur traders, scouts, and explorers. Enjoy these while you relax or drive. Please leave a like, comment, and share. For further desert adventures, hit the subscribe button. Hit the bell to be notified of new videos. If you would like to help support my channel, hit the super thanks heart icon on the bottom of the video and contribute. Let's dive into some more captivating tales. Welcome to another episode of the Southwest Desert, where we dive into the fascinating stories of the American Southwest. Today, we're exploring the life of Herman Wolf, an enigmatic figure who established one of the earliest trading posts in the Navajo country of northern Arizona. His story is one of survival, determination, and mystery in a time when the West was still wild. Our tale begins over 100 years ago, during the heyday of the fur trade in the American West. Herman Wolf, a tall man with prematurely gray hair, arrived in the region west of the Rockies, drawn by the lure of trapping. In 1838, he rode with the legendary Kit Carson's mountain men, just as the beaver trade was beginning to decline due to changing fashions in Europe. That same year, Wolf joined forces with Billy Mitchell from Ohio and Fred Smith from Texas. These three men roamed far and wide across the Southwest, but found themselves disheartened by the disappearance of both beaver and the once lucrative beaver trade. A letter from Fred Smith, written in Taos in 1845, gives us a glimpse into Wolf's character. Smith described him as extremely moody and silent, but also noted his reputation as a formidable fighter. According to Smith, Wolf was known for never backing down from a fight and had gained notoriety for his skill in conflicts with Native Americans. One particular incident in Taos illustrates Wolf's temperament. When a man named Jose Baca attempted to rob him, Wolf, who had been minding his own business and not drinking, responded with swift and decisive action. He struck Baca with a boot, and when others joined in to attack him, shot Baca dead. This event led Wolf and his companions to quickly leave Taos. In 1846, as the American Army took control of the Southwest, Wolf made his way to the Little Colorado River. Between what is now Winslow and Grand Falls, he found the river lined with willows and some remaining beaver. He set about trapping them, working his way down into the Grand Canyon and its tributaries. However, the life of a trapper in this region was fraught with danger. In the spring of 1848, near present-day Holbrook, Wolf had a close encounter with Apache raiders. They robbed him of every fur he had packed on 2 large mules, though he managed to escape with his life. For the next several years, Wolf's movements are somewhat unclear. He was seen in various locations across the West, including the Green River Valley in Utah and back in Taos. At the outbreak of the Civil War, he left Taos, supposedly heading for St. Louis, Missouri. For the next 5 years, there is no record of his activities, though it's believed he may have served on one side or the other in the conflict. After the war, Wolf reappeared in Taos and Santa Fe. In 1866, he once again ventured into Arizona, following the Rio Puerco to its junction with the Little Colorado, and then west along that stream. Despite the presence of roving bands of Navajo, Paiute, and Apache along the river, he emerged in the spring of 1867 with a successful haul of furs. The spring of 1868 proved to be a turning point in Wolf's life. During a trapping expedition, he was ambushed by Apaches in Tucker Flat, between Winslow and the river. In a display of the fighting prowess that had made him legendary, Wolf turned on his attackers, killing 4 and fighting his way through to the north side of the river with his pack animals intact. This close call seems to have prompted Wolf to establish a more permanent presence in the region. That summer, he returned to the Little Colorado, this time accompanied by 3 Mexicans and nearly a score of mules and horses laden with trade goods. He chose a spot on the south side of the river, about 12 miles below Hopi Ford, near what is now Loup, Arizona. Here, Wolf constructed what would become the first trading post in the region. It was a simple but defensible structure built of cottonwood and willow logs set vertically in a trench. The single room measured approximately 40 by 20 feet, with no windows and only slitted holes for rifle fire. The flat roof was made of poles covered with red clay. The establishment of Wolf's trading post coincided with significant changes in the region. The Navajo were moving west from Bosque Redondo, where most of them had been forcibly relocated in 1864. Meanwhile, Apache raiders were active in the area, with some reportedly lurking in caves in Canyon Diablo, ambushing travelers on the California Santa Fe Trail. The first customers at Wolf's Post were Hopi people from villages 50 miles to the north, followed by Paiute tribesmen and Havasupais from Willow Springs and Muncopi. Eventually, some Navajo who had evaded relocation also began to trade at the post. Wolf's relationship with the local Native American leaders was complex. Bugoetin, a local Navajo chief, was friendly but known to be tricky. Another chief, Hostine Redshirt, became a valuable ally, making it possible for Wolf to remain in the area. This alliance proved crucial, as Wolf often relied on Navajo protection against raids from other tribes. Life at the trading post was far from peaceful. In September 1868, a party of about 50 Paiutes killed 9 Hopi traders just south of Newberry Mesa. The Paiutes then surrounded Wolf's post, attempting to break in and eventually setting one corner of the stockade on fire. Wolf and his Mexican helpers managed to drive off the attackers and extinguish the fire, but the danger was far from over. Just 10 days later, the post was attacked by Apaches at dawn. One of Wolf's Mexican helpers was killed, another wounded, and the third fled during the fight. Wolf fought alone until Navajo allies arrived to drive off the Apaches. These attacks took their toll on trade, prompting Wolf to return to trapping for a time. It was during this period that the post received its Navajo name, Beaver House, due to the drying beaver pelts on frames. Wolf himself became known as Mr. Beaver. As the 1870s progressed, the region began to change. The California Santa Fe Trail crossing northern Arizona became more heavily traveled. This gave Wolf new outlets for his Native American products and furs, as well as new sources for supplies. Mormon immigrants began passing by Wolf's trading post in the summer of 1874, marking the beginning of increased white settlement in the area. This brought new challenges, including several robberies by white outlaws. In response to these changes and increasing dangers, Wolf decided to upgrade his trading post in 1880. He erected a new square post made of red sandstone a few hundred feet east of the old stockade on higher ground. This new structure included a store, kitchen, and bedroom. The arrival of the railroad at Canyon Diablo in 1881 brought dramatic changes to the region. A small boom town sprang up, though it was short-lived. For Wolf, the railroad provided easier access to trade goods, but it also signaled the end of the old frontier way of life. As he aged, Wolf spent less time actively trading and more time sitting in a chair while clerks handled the business. He maintained some contact with relatives in Germany and occasionally received barrels of bottled Rhine wine. As with many frontier figures, Wolf's life became surrounded by mystery and legend. Stories circulated that he had buried his wealth somewhere near the trading post or in the river canyon. These tales were fueled by occasions when Wolf was seen leaving the post and returning with a leather sack of gold coins. In 1885, 5 white outlaws, believing these stories, broke into the post at night and demanded Wolf reveal his hidden hoard. When he denied having any money, they tortured him with hot wires on his feet. Navajo traders found him unconscious the next day and revived him. From then on, Wolf became even more wary of strangers and always kept his doors barred. As the 1890s drew to a close, Wolf's health began to decline. In the spring of 1899, he revealed to acquaintances in Flagstaff that he had a brother, Franz Wolf, a retired major general in the German army, who was planning to visit him. In late August of that year, Wolf traveled to Flagstaff, explaining that his brother was in San Francisco and would soon arrive. However, Wolf returned home seriously ill before his brother arrived. Despite his clerk's pleas, Wolf refused to let anyone send for a doctor. Finally, when Wolf lost consciousness, a message was sent to Flagstaff for a physician. His brother, having arrived in Flagstaff, joined Dr. Miller on the journey to Wolf's post, but they were too late. Herman Wolf passed away on September 3, 1899, just hours before they arrived. Herman Wolf was buried in the cemetery at Canyon Diablo. His tombstone gives his age at death as 69 years, which would place his birth year around 1830. However, this conflicts with accounts of his early life, including his rides with Kit Carson's mountain men. Many pioneers who knew Wolf in his later years insisted he was at least 90 when he died. The mystery of Wolf's buried treasure persisted after his death. The new operators of the trading post, George McAdams and S.I. Richardson, spent considerable time searching the area, turning over rocks and digging up the ground. They found evidence of old caches where something had been buried, but no treasure. What became of Wolf's savings reported to be considerable? The answer to this question, like much of Herman Wolf's life, remains a mystery. Herman Wolf's story is a testament to the rugged individualism and adaptability that characterized many pioneers of the American West. From fur trapper to Indian trader, he navigated the dangerous and rapidly changing landscape of the Southwest for over half a century. His trading post stood as a lone outpost of commerce in a wild land, bridging cultures and serving as a focal point for the region's tumultuous history. Wolf's life spanned a period of immense change, from the days of mountain men and beaver traps to the arrival of the railroad and the closing of the frontier. Through it all, he remained an enigmatic figure, leaving behind as many questions as answers. As we reflect on the story of Herman Wolf, we're reminded of the complex and often overlooked lives that shaped the American West. His legacy lives on in the stories passed down through generations and in the very landscape he called home for so many years. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Southwest Desert. Until next time, keep exploring the rich history of the American Southwest. Welcome to the Southwest Desert Channel, where we delve into the fascinating stories of the American Southwest. Today, we're exploring the life of Louie Simonds, a remarkable figure who lived during the twilight of the fur-trapping era and well into the settlement of the American frontier. His story is one of adventure, love, tragedy, and the changing face of the American West. Our tale begins in 1817 when Luther W. Simonds, better known as Louie, was born somewhere in Kentucky. Like many young men of his time, Louie was drawn to the promise of adventure and fortune in the West. At the tender age of 14, he joined the Old Fur Brigade, embarking on a life that would take him far from his Kentucky roots. In 1831, the same year he joined the brigade, young Louie accompanied a group of seasoned trappers into the Uinta Basin. It was here that he first encountered Antoine Laru, a prominent fur trader who would later establish a trading post in the area. This early expedition marked the beginning of Louis's long association with the Uinta region, a place that would play a significant role in his later years. For the next decade and a half, Louis honed his skills as a trapper and mountain man. He learned to navigate the rugged terrain of the Rocky Mountains, to read the signs of nature, and to survive in the harsh wilderness. By 1846, when he was encountered in Santa Fe and Taos by Louis H. Garrard, author of Watuya and the Taos Trail, Louis had become known as one of the best trappers in the Rocky Mountains. Garrard's account paints a vivid picture of Louie Simonds. He describes him as a wild, brave, and carefree mountain man, full of tall tales and never hesitant to recount his own exploits. Like many of his fellow trappers, Louis was illiterate, but what he lacked in formal education, he made up for in practical skills and outdoor knowledge. Our story takes an interesting turn in 1852, when Louis, now 35 years old, married Adeline Carson in Taos. Adeline was no ordinary bride. She was the daughter of the legendary Kit Carson, perhaps the most famous of all the mountain men. Adeline's own story is worth noting. She was born around 1837 to Kit Carson and his Arapaho wife, Wa Naib, also known as Singing Grass. Tragically, Singing Grass died when Adeline was only about 2 years old. Unable to care for an infant while pursuing his trapping career, Kit initially left Adeline with her mother's relatives. In 1842, when Adeline was about 5 years old, Kit Carson took her back to his old home in Howard County, Missouri. There, he left her in the care of his sister, Elizabeth, making provisions for her care and education. Adeline remained in Missouri until she was 13, receiving a formal education that was rare for a girl of her background in those times. In 1851, Kit Carson returned to Missouri to bring his daughter back to Santa Fe. The journey was not without peril. Near the Cimarron, their party was attacked by Cheyenne, and it was only Kit's quick thinking that saved them from massacre. Back in Santa Fe, Adeline lived with her father and his new Spanish wife, Josefa. However, this arrangement may not have been ideal. Josefa, herself only 22 years old, might not have been entirely comfortable with her 14-year-old stepdaughter, particularly given Adeline's mixed heritage. It was in this context that Adeline, at just 14 years old, married the 35-year-old Louie Simonds in 1852. While such an age difference might shock us today, it wasn't uncommon in those times. Kit Carson himself had married Josefa when she was 14, and he likely saw marriage as a way to ensure his daughter's future. Immediately after their marriage, Louis and Adeline left for California. The timing of their move is significant. The California gold rush was in full swing, having begun in 1848. Like many others, Louis decided to try his luck in the Golden State. However, life in Gold Rush, California proved challenging for the couple. Louis, accustomed to the solitary life of a trapper, found himself out of place in the frenetic atmosphere of California's booming towns. At 36, the bright lights and constant excitement held little appeal for him. Adeline, on the other hand, seems to have embraced her new surroundings. At 15, she was at an age where the excitement and opportunities of California were irresistible. The stark difference in their attitudes towards their new life created a rift between the couple. As one might expect in such a situation, tragedy struck. Adeline met a man more aligned with her youthful energy and ran away with him. In the chaos of the gold rush, with miners constantly moving from one strike to another, it might have seemed impossible to track down two individuals. But Louie Simonds was no ordinary man. He had spent years tracking game and evading hostile Native Americans. With the patience and skill of an experienced mountain man, he followed their trail persistently, year after year. In 1859, Louis finally caught up with Adeline and her new companion in Mono diggings. By this time, Adeline was known as Prairie Flower, Kit Carson's daughter. Without revealing his presence, Louis carefully observed the situation, biding his time. When he deemed the moment right, Louis took action. With the precision of a seasoned hunter, he used his Kentucky rifle to eliminate Adeline's companion. The man was buried the next day, but no one ever knew who had killed him. This grim act of vengeance marked a turning point in Louis's life. With this matter settled, he was ready to leave California behind and return to the mountains he knew so well. Louis's decision to return to the mountains was not a simple one. He couldn't return to Taos, where Kit Carson might ask uncomfortable questions about Adeline. Many of his old trapper friends had settled in various parts of the West, but Louis wasn't looking for company. After careful consideration, he decided to return to the Uinta Mountains, where he had first come as a young boy with the Fur Brigade. It was one of the wildest, most isolated spots in the West, far from the usual routes of travel. Robidoux trading post had been burned down, and there were no white settlers in the Uinta Basin at that time. So, in the fall of 1859, Louie Simonds retreated to Brown's Hole in the Uinta Mountains. This area was used by Native Americans and a handful of mixed-race individuals left behind by the fur trade as a winter camp. Louis arrived with minimal possessions: a horse, a pair of greyhounds, a few traps, and his trusty Kentucky rifle. His years as a mountain man had taught him how to live off the land, and that was exactly what he intended to do. For the next 20 years, Louie Simonds lived in the mountains, adopting a lifestyle more akin to that of a Native American than a white settler. His old companions from the trapping days assumed he had died. He lived in isolation, relying on his hunting and trapping skills to survive. This solitary existence came to an end in the spring of 1879, when Louis emerged from the mountains to discover that the world had changed around him. White settlers had moved into the Uinta Basin, arriving in covered wagons to farm the flat valley along the Uinta River. A troop of soldiers had established an encampment at Fort Duchesne, tasked with protecting the settlers from Ute raids. Despite these changes, Louis was not eager to rejoin society. He had lived alone for so long that he had no desire to adjust to the new conditions. Instead, he continued to live in a crude cabin in the mountains, subsisting primarily on wild game. He would trap a little and trade his pelts at Fort Bridger for essentials like gunpowder, lead, and occasionally coffee and sugar. As the years passed, Louie Simonds became a familiar figure in the Uinta Basin. He was now known to all as Uncle Louie. He would sometimes make a winter camp near a ranch, and on his infrequent trips through the valley, he was always welcomed by the settlers. Uncle Louie was selective about the parts of his past he shared. Only trusted friends like Pete Dillman and Finn Britt ever learned the full story of why he lived alone in the mountains. To most, he was simply a colorful character from the early days of the West. As he grew older, Uncle Louie was afflicted with palsy, which made his hands shake uncontrollably. Despite this, he managed to continue hunting, using what Bill Williams described as a double wobble to steady his rifle. In the frontier town of Vernal, he became known for his unique way of drinking whiskey. He would have to sip it from a glass sitting on the bar because his hands were too unsteady to lift the glass to his lips. The winter of 1893 marked the beginning of the end for Uncle Louie. He was living in a small log shack in a canyon above the White Rocks Ute Indian Agency. He would occasionally ride down to the trading post for supplies or to share his stories. But when a heavy snow fell, he wasn't seen for several weeks. In the spring, soldiers searching for a strayed horse stumbled upon Uncle Louie's cabin. They found the old man helpless in his bed, nearly starved to death and suffering from frostbite. They took him to the military hospital at Fort Duchesne, where he remained for several weeks. However, the long illness had taken its toll on Uncle Louie's mind. In March 1894, he was sent to the Utah State Mental Hospital in Provo. George Searle, then sheriff of Uintah County, was given the task of transporting the old mountain man. Louie was admitted to the hospital on March 8, 1894, diagnosed with senile dementia. But Uncle Louie wasn't quite done yet. On October 1, 1894, he was discharged from the hospital, declared cured. Unfortunately, there's no record of where he went after his release or when he ultimately passed away. Old-timers in the Uintah Basin insist that he never returned to his old haunts. Before leaving for the hospital, Uncle Louie had given Sheriff Searle a bundle of papers and letters for safekeeping. He never returned to claim them, and although Searle kept them for many years, they were eventually lost. One can only wonder what stories those papers might have told. Perhaps they contained letters from Adeline Carson, the Prairie Flower. As for Adeline, her story came to an end long before Uncle Louie's. She died in 1860 and was buried on the shore of Mono Lake. Her friends had planned to erect a monument over her grave, but it was never done, and the exact location of her final resting place has been lost to time. Louie Simonds' life spanned an era of immense change in the American West. He began his Western adventures when the fur trade was still booming, lived through the gold rush, and survived to see the settlement of areas that were wilderness in his youth. His story, pieced together from the memories of those who knew him and other historical sources, gives us a glimpse into a bygone era. It's a tale of adventure, love, tragedy, and survival, a true embodiment of the spirit of the Old West. To the settlers of the Uintah Basin in the late 19th century, Uncle Louie was a living link to the early days of westward expansion. His tales of Jim Bridger, Kit Carson, and the fur-trapping days must have seemed like ancient history to them. As we conclude this tale, it's worth reflecting on the extraordinary life of Louie Simonds. From a young Kentucky boy joining the Fur Brigade, to Kit Carson's son-in-law, to a solitary mountain dweller, his journey tells us much about the changing face of the American West. It reminds us that history is not just about grand events and famous figures, but also about the lives of individuals who, in their own way, shaped and were shaped by the times in which they lived. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. Until next time, keep exploring the fascinating stories of our past. Welcome to the Southwest Desert. Today we're exploring the life of Antoine Laru, an unsung hero of the American West. Though less famous today than contemporaries like Kit Carson, Leroux was equally esteemed in his time as a trapper, scout, guide, and Indian fighter. Our story begins on November 3, 1851. A government expedition led by Captain Lorenzo Sitgreaves is camped on Yampai Creek in northwestern Arizona. Their French-Canadian guide, Antoine Laru, is preparing to scout ahead. The success of the mission rests heavily on Leroux's knowledge of the harsh landscape and its hostile inhabitants. Leroux rides off to scout for water, eventually spotting a small mountain in the distance. As he nears the summit, disaster strikes. Leroux hears bowstrings and finds himself under attack by arrows. Before he can dismount, he's hit by 3 flint arrowheads, 2 in the head and 1 in the wrist. Stunned, Leroux falls from his horse, cursing his carelessness. He should have known the Yampai would have lookouts posted. Fortunately, his skull proves harder than the arrows. The head wounds are painful but not serious. The wrist injury is deeper. He pulls out the shaft but can't dislodge the flint point. Leroux makes his way back to camp, troubled by what the others will think of his carelessness. He has a hard-earned reputation to maintain as the foremost authority on the region. But who was Antoine Laru, and how did he gain such intimate knowledge of this vast, dangerous territory? Unfortunately, like many French-Canadian frontiersmen, Leroux never kept a journal. But from scattered records, we can piece together his remarkable story. The Leroux family settled in St. Louis in the early 19th century. In 1822, Antoine first traveled to Taos over the Santa Fe Trail, probably with the Robidoux brothers. Taos became his home base for decades. He married a Spanish woman there and received a land grant near Arroyo Seco. In the late 1820s and 1830s, Leroux helped establish some of the earliest trading posts in the interior West, including Fort Robidoux in Colorado and Fort Uintah in Utah. His first known expedition into Arizona was with Michael Robidoux in 1827. Near the Maricopa villages, they were attacked and nearly wiped out. The survivors joined James O. Patty's trappers, traveling down the Gila River to the Colorado. On a later expedition, Leroux met the famous mountain man, Old Bill Williams. These scattered incidents are all we know of Leroux's early travels, but his later reputation proves he must have explored nearly every mile of the Southwest. Leroux vanishes from records for about a decade, resurfacing in 1846 during the Mexican-American War. That year, General Stephen Kearny led his dragoons towards California, guided by Kit Carson, Thomas Fitzpatrick, and Antoine Robidoux. Following behind came Colonel Philip St. George Cook with the Mormon Battalion and wagons. Cook hired Leroux to find a wagon-suitable route, describing him as a most sensible and experienced guide. Leroux successfully led these wagons where no vehicles had ever traveled before. After the war, Leroux returned to his ranch near Taos. In March 1849, he guided Lieutenant J. H. Whittlesey's expedition against hostile Utes. Later that year, he served as chief scout for Captain Greer's punitive expedition against Apaches, who had massacred whites at Point of Rocks. In 1851, Leroux guided the Sitgreaves expedition we opened with. After his mishap with the Yampai, Leroux's infected wrist troubled him for the rest of the journey. The party traveled to the Mojave villages, then to Camp Yuma, where they were attacked by Native Americans. That they didn't suffer greater losses was largely thanks to Leroux's expertise. 1853 was an especially busy year for Leroux. In May, he met Edward F. Beale on the Santa Fe Trail, agreeing to guide him to California, but illness prevented the journey. Meanwhile, 2 government railroad survey parties arrived in New Mexico, one under Lieutenant Amiel Whipple, the other led by Lieutenant Beckwith and Captain Gunnison. Whipple initially engaged Leroux, but Gunnison secured his services instead. Gunnison's mission was to explore a potential railroad route from Santa Fe to the Great Basin. Leroux joined in Taos on August 19, 1853. Gunnison quickly appreciated Leroux's expertise. He knew every mountain pass and could describe their suitability for a railroad in advance, saving difficult travel. After mapping the route, Leroux left Gunnison's party to rejoin Whipple in Albuquerque. The artist Heinrich Baldwin Mühlhausen, who accompanied Gunnison, wrote of Leroux, "The confidence which he inspired, a confidence earned by 30 years' toil in primeval wilderness, made us all rejoice at having secured his services." Whipple had assembled an enormous expedition, 114 men, 16 wagons, and 200 mules. They departed on November 7th, following a route that would later approximate the Santa Fe Railroad. Guiding such a large group through nearly waterless deserts placed enormous responsibility on Leroux. The expedition spent Christmas near present-day Winona, Arizona. After abandoning most wagons, they crossed the Colorado at the Mojave villages. According to Leroux, they were the first to pass without a fight. Continuing west, they met Mormons who delivered shocking news. Captain Gunnison and most of his party had been massacred by Native Americans in Utah. In May 1854, returning from Los Angeles, Leroux traveled from the Pima villages to the Little Colorado, discovering famous ruins in Verde Valley. This route was later shown on maps as the Leroux Trail. After these expeditions, the record grows quiet on Leroux's activities. He likely retired to his ranch or home in Taos, but the exact place and date of his death remain unknown. This uncertainty exemplifies the challenge in piecing together Leroux's life story. Despite his significant contributions, he has largely faded from historical memory. During his lifetime, Leroux was considered Kit Carson's equal as a scout. The routes he explored were later used by railroads and highways through New Mexico and Arizona. Yet today, his only monuments are Leroux Wash at Holbrook, Leroux Island in the Little Colorado, and Leroux Springs near Flagstaff, all named by Sitgreaves and Whipple. All who Leroux guided praised his knowledge and abilities, but sadly, none recorded a description of the man himself. It's particularly unfortunate that Leroux left no written account, as he was well educated in French and English. He was even selected as a delegate to the Territorial Convention at Santa Fe in 1851 and frequently consulted by engineers during early railroad surveys. As late as 1868, Leroux's letters describing the Southwest were quoted by authors, but no biographer discovered him in time to preserve his full story. Nearly all that's known of him is contained in the scattered records we've discussed. This represents a significant loss to Western history. Antoine Laru was one of the most knowledgeable guides of the mid-19th century Southwest. He played a crucial role in multiple important expeditions that helped map and open the region. His familiarity with the landscape, waterways, and native peoples was unparalleled. Leroux's story offers a window into a pivotal period of American expansion. He witnessed the transition of the Southwest from Mexican territory to U.S. control, the decline of the fur trade, and the rise of government-sponsored exploration. His career spanned the evolution from individual trappers to large-scale military and scientific expeditions. Leroux's ability to move between these worlds, from solitary trapping to guiding wagon trains and survey parties, speaks to his adaptability and diverse skills. He possessed not only wilderness survival abilities, but also leadership qualities and the capacity to work within structured military and scientific contexts. Leroux's multicultural background is also noteworthy. As a French-Canadian who married into a Spanish family in New Mexico, he embodied the cultural mixing of the borderlands. His ability to navigate between Anglo-American, Hispanic, and Native American cultures was likely key to his success as a guide. In many ways, Antoine Laru represents a type of frontiersman critical to westward expansion, but often overshadowed in popular history. While names like Kit Carson achieved lasting fame, equally skilled men like Leroux faded into obscurity. This reflects both the capriciousness of historical memory and the importance of written records in shaping that memory. Leroux's story reminds us that history is full of influential figures whose contributions have been largely forgotten. It prompts us to consider how many other Antoine Laroux's there might be. Men and women who played crucial roles in shaping the American West but whose stories have been lost to time. As we conclude our exploration of Antoine Laroux's life, we're left with a mixture of fascination and frustration. Fascination at the glimpses we get of this remarkably skilled frontiersman. Frustration at the many gaps in our understanding of his life and character. Leroux's legacy lives on in the geography of the Southwest, in the springs, washes, and trails that bear his name, It lives on in the maps he helped create and the routes he pioneered. But perhaps most importantly, it lives on in our continuing efforts to uncover and understand the complex history of the American frontier. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Southwest Desert. We hope you've enjoyed this journey into the life of Antoine Laru, and we look forward to bringing you more stories of the unsung heroes of the Southwest in future episodes. Welcome to today's episode of the Southwest Desert, where we'll be exploring the remarkable life and legacy of Father Eusebio Francisco Kino, a Jesuit missionary who played a pivotal role in the history of the American Southwest. Our story begins on May 3, 1700, at San Cayetano del Tumacacore, where Father Kino receives an urgent message. This single day would come to exemplify the courage, compassion, and tireless dedication that defined Kino's mission in the New World. As dawn breaks over the desert landscape, a Native American rider arrives at Tumacacore with a letter from Father Agustin de Campos at San Ignacio del Caborca. The message is clear. Father Kino must hurry if he hopes to save the life of a Native American condemned to be beaten to death by Spanish soldiers, simply for the crime of running away. This moment captures the constant tension Father Kino navigated between his spiritual mission and the harsh realities of colonial expansion. While the Spanish soldiers saw their role as keeping the native population submissive, Kino viewed the indigenous people as fellow human beings worthy of dignity, education, and salvation. Let's take a step back to understand how Father Kino found himself in this pivotal position. Born in 1645 in the Italian town of Segno, Eusebio Kino joined the Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuits, in 1665 after recovering from a life-threatening illness. During his convalescence, he had made a vow that if he survived, he would dedicate his life to missionary work. True to his word, the young Kino repeatedly petitioned his superiors to be sent on a difficult mission to minister to indigenous people in far-off lands. His persistence paid off, and in 1681, at the age of 36, Kino arrived in Veracruz, Mexico, ready to begin his life's work in the New World. For the next 2 decades, Father Kino would traverse vast stretches of what is now northern Mexico and the American Southwest, particularly the region known as Pimeria Alta, the land of the Upper Pima Native Americans. His mission was not just to spread Christianity, but to improve the lives of the native people he encountered. Kino was more than just a priest. He was an explorer, a cartographer, a rancher, and a diplomat. He was the first to prove that California was a peninsula rather than an island, a geographical fact that had long been debated. But his true passion always remained his work among the indigenous people of the region. Father Kino's approach went far beyond simple religious conversion. He sought to transform the entire way of life for the people he encountered. He introduced European livestock, cattle, sheep, and goats to the region, effectively establishing the first ranches in what would become Arizona. He taught the Native Americans how to be cowboys, farmers, and craftsmen. This practical approach to mission work was revolutionary for its time. Kino believed that by teaching the Native Americans to engage in peaceful, productive pursuits, he could steer them away from warfare and towards a stable Christian way of life. The dozen or so great ranches he established became centers of both spiritual and economic activity, laying the groundwork for future missionaries to continue his work. Now, let's return to that fateful day in May 1700. Despite the urgency of the situation, Father Kino begins his day as he always does. by celebrating Mass. After Mass, Kino mounts his horse and sets off on a grueling journey. He must cover 70 miles of rugged terrain in less than 24 hours if he hopes to reach San Ignacio in time to save the condemned man. The path takes him through what is now Nogales and San Simon before reaching Immerse just before midnight. It's worth noting that at this point, Father Kino was no longer a young man. At 55 years old, such a demanding ride would have been a significant physical challenge, yet his writings betray no hint of complaint or hesitation. For Kino, this was simply part of his calling, another opportunity to serve the people he had dedicated his life to protecting. In the early hours of May 4th, Father Kino arrives at San Ignacio, where he immediately says Mass before turning his attention to the urgent matter at hand. Together with Father Campos, he goes to plead with the military authorities for the life of the condemned Native American. This interaction showcases another of Kino's remarkable skills: his ability to navigate the complex political landscape of colonial New Spain. Though he often found himself at odds with the military authorities, Kino knew how to speak their language and appeal to their sensibilities. In his plea for the Native American's life, Kino employs a mix of moral and practical arguments. He points out that beating a man to death for running away is not only cruel but counterproductive. Such brutality, he argues, would only breed resentment among the native population, ultimately undermining Spain's authority in the region. Justice tempered with mercy, Kino contends, would prove far more effective in maintaining order. Kino's eloquence and reasoning prevail. The military authorities agree to release the Native American, a victory not just for one man's life, but for the broader principle of humane treatment that Kino championed throughout his career. This incident was not an isolated event in Kino's ministry. Throughout his time in the New World, he frequently found himself interceding on behalf of the indigenous people against the harsh treatment of Spanish authorities. His compassion and sense of justice earned him the trust and respect of many native communities, allowing him to make inroads where other missionaries had failed. One particularly poignant example of this occurred in 1695, when Father Francisco Xavier Saita was killed by a band of Pima Native Americans. The Spanish response was swift and brutal, resulting in the deaths of over 50 Native Americans, most of whom, according to Kino, were innocent of any involvement in Saita's death. This indiscriminate retaliation threatened to undo years of Kino's patient work among the Pima. Yet even in this dire situation, Kino's diplomatic skills and commitment to justice shone through. He worked tirelessly to ensure that only those directly responsible for Saita's death were punished, and even then, he advocated for mercy. In a remarkable turn of events, the Native Americans who had participated in Saita's murder were ultimately pardoned after being prepared for death and given the last rites of the Church. This blend of justice and mercy, so characteristic of Kino's approach, helped to repair relations between the Spanish and the Pima, allowing his missionary work to continue. As we reflect on Father Kino's life and work, it's important to understand the broader historical context in which he operated. The late 17th and early 18th centuries were a time of significant expansion and conflict in the Americas. European powers were vying for control of vast territories, often with little regard for the indigenous populations who had called these lands home for millennia. In this tumultuous environment, figures like Father Kino played a complex and sometimes contradictory role. On one hand, they were agents of European colonization, bringing with them a religion and way of life that was foreign to the native inhabitants. On the other hand, many missionaries like Kino genuinely cared for the welfare of the indigenous people and often served as their advocates against the worst excesses of colonial rule. Kino's legacy in the Southwest is profound and enduring. The missions he established became the seeds from which many modern communities grew. His introduction of European livestock and farming techniques transformed the economy of the region. Even today, centuries later, the remains of some of the churches he built still stand as testament to his influence. Perhaps most importantly, Kino's detailed writings and maps provided invaluable information about a part of North America that was largely unknown to Europeans at the time. His observations on the geography, climate, and native peoples of the region continue to be an important resource for historians and anthropologists. But beyond these tangible achievements, it's the spirit of Father Kino's work that truly sets him apart. In an era often marked by cruelty and exploitation, Kino consistently chose the path of compassion and respect. He saw the humanity in the people he encountered, recognizing their dignity and potential at a time when many of his contemporaries viewed them as little more than savages to be conquered or souls to be saved. This is not to say that Kino was perfect or that his actions were always beneficial from our modern perspective. Like all historical figures, he was a product of his time, and his mission was ultimately part of a larger process of colonization that had devastating consequences for many indigenous communities. However, within the context of his era, Kino stands out as a voice for justice and human dignity. His tireless efforts to protect the Native Americans from exploitation, his commitment to education and economic development, and his respect for indigenous cultures set him apart from many of his contemporaries. As our story draws to a close, let's return one final time to that May Day in 1700. After successfully intervening to save the life of the condemned Native American, Father Kino doesn't rest on his laurels. Instead, he continues on his planned journey to Dolores, arriving there on May 6th. For Kino, saving a man's life was simply part of the day's work, an extraordinary act that he treated as ordinary. His life reminds us of the power of perseverance in the face of adversity, the importance of bridging cultural divides, and the profound impact that one dedicated individual can have on the lives of many. While we may not agree with all aspects of his mission, we can certainly admire his courage, his compassion, and his unwavering commitment to improving the lives of those he served. Father Eusebio Francisco Kino, priest, explorer, diplomat, and humanitarian. His story is a testament to the complex tapestry of history, where great achievements often come hand in hand with profound challenges. As we look back on his life from our vantage point in the 21st century, we can appreciate the indelible mark he left on the landscape, the people, and the very soul of the American Southwest. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. Until next time, may we all strive to face our own challenges with the same courage and compassion that Father Kino displayed on that dusty trail so many years ago. Welcome to our Southwest Desert channel, where today we delve into one of the most gripping stories from the Southwest Desert. We'll be exploring the remarkable tale of the Manly Bennett party and their harrowing journey through Death Valley in the winter of 1849. This is a story of perseverance, selflessness, and the triumph of the human spirit in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. Our story starts with a massive wagon train of 107 wagons, 350 people, and 500 head of livestock departing from Salt Lake City, bound for the promise of riches in the California gold fields. As is often the case with such large groups, impatience and the lure of gold soon led to fragmentation. Smaller parties broke away, eager to push ahead and reach their destination faster. Among these smaller groups was the Manly Bennett party, led by Asabel Bennett. This group included two men who would become the heroes of our story, William Lewis Manley and John Rogers. Manley, a 29-year-old frontiersman with experience as a scout and hunter, had joined the Bennets, likely drawn by the courage of their three young children. As Christmas of 1849 passed and the new year approached, the Manley Bennett party found themselves crossing a desolate expanse that would later become known as Death Valley. Exhausted and running low on supplies, they reached the base of a great snow-capped mountain. It was here that they made a fateful decision, to send for help from the settlements. The group was lost, but driven by an instinct to continue westward. This urge had caused numerous splits in the larger party and had added to their toil and misery. Little did they know that if they had turned south, they could have saved their wagons and avoided much of their suffering. Recognizing the dire situation, the group decided to send their two strongest members to seek help. The selection was natural. Manley, the most fit at 29 years old, and John Rogers, a large, strong, and steady young man from Tennessee. With most of the dried meat from a lean ox packed in their bags, Manley and Rogers set out on foot, waving goodbye to their friends who promised to wait not over 10 days. What followed was a journey as thrilling as any work of fiction. Manley and Rogers faced near-death experiences from thirst, but eventually stumbled into green valleys near present-day Newhall. There, they were met with the warm hospitality of Californians who provided them with much-needed sustenance: beans, bread, beef, and horses. We come to a pivotal moment in our story. Manley and Rogers had reached safety. They had found the green paradise they sought. They could have chosen to stay, to pursue their original goal of finding gold and making their fortunes. There would likely have been no survivors from the group they left behind to accuse them of cowardice. But this is where the true heroism of these men shines through. Without a moment's hesitation, without even pausing to rest, Manley and Rogers turned back towards the desert. They had no blood ties to the people they had left behind. They were single men who had only ridden with the Bennets by chance, but their code of honor, their sense of duty, would not allow them to abandon those who depended on them. Their only concern was that they had already taken 16 days to cover the 250 miles that separated them from their mission's completion. Time was of the essence, and they knew that every day could mean the difference between life and death for the Manley Bennett party. The journey back was no less treacherous than their initial trek. All 4 horses they had been given died along the way, but in a stroke of luck that must have seemed like divine intervention, a small desert burro carried its heavy pack almost cheerfully to the desert camp and back to the green valleys. Manley, in his later writings, would repeatedly praise this sturdy animal, affectionately referring to it as a mule. This is the scene that unfolded when Manley and Rogers finally returned to the camp. 2 lean, weary men in ragged, travel-soiled buckskin stood staring breathlessly at a distant group of wagons on the floor of Death Valley. Anxiety and emotion left them too faint to step forward. Had their arduous mercy mission been in vain? Were their friends dead? Had they been massacred by Indians? Or had they grown tired of waiting and struggled on afoot? Suddenly, a man emerged from under one of the wagons. He stood up, looked around, and then, in a moment of pure joy, threw his hands over his head and shouted, "The boys are here! The boys have come!" The suspense was over. The tiny group had waited patiently for 5 painful weeks, confident that our boys would return to deliver them from death. To the tear-brimmed eyes of the Bennets and Arcanes, the little burro that accompanied Manley and Rogers must have been the most beautiful creature in the world. With renewed hope, the party prepared for the final leg of their journey. The children were loaded into makeshift pocket bags on the back of Old Crump, a steady ox. As they climbed a southern toe of the Panamint Range, Manley and Rogers offered constant encouragement. When they reached the highest ridge, The group paused and looked back over the long, narrow valley they had crossed. In the distance, they could see a wisp of smoke marking the remains of their abandoned wagon. In a poignant moment, they spoke in chorus the thought uppermost in their minds: "Goodbye, Death Valley." Although history shows that only one man of the entire 49 party actually perished on the floor of the valley, the forbidding name Death Valley stuck. But more than just naming a geographic location, this journey left an indelible mark on the annals of Western exploration. The story of the Manly Bennett party stands out among the many tales of the California Gold Rush. It's a testament to human resilience, to the bonds that form between strangers in the face of adversity, and to the heights of selflessness that individuals can reach. William Lewis Manly, in particular, emerges as a figure of almost mythic proportions. In his book Death Valley in '49, written in 1893, Manly recounts the events with a modesty that only adds to his stature. Unlike many accounts from pioneers that dwelt on hardships and desperation, Manly's narrative is imbued with a triumphant optimism and an unwavering confidence in the human will to survive. Their story is a powerful reminder of the impact that individual choices can have. In a situation where it would have been easy, and perhaps even understandable, to prioritize their own survival, Manly and Rogers chose to honor their commitment to their fellow travelers. They exemplify the kind of heroism that doesn't seek glory or recognition, but simply does what is right, because it is right. It's important to place this story within the broader context of the California Gold Rush. This was a time of great upheaval and opportunity, where fortunes could be made or lost in an instant. The lure of gold drew people from all walks of life, from all corners of the country and beyond. It was a journey that tested the mettle of even the hardiest individuals. The Manly Bennett party's experience was not unique in its hardships. Many who set out for California faced similar challenges: harsh terrain, unpredictable weather, limited supplies, and the constant threat of illness or injury. What sets their story apart is the way they faced these challenges, not just with determination, but with a sense of community and mutual responsibility. It's worth considering what lessons we can draw from this remarkable story. In our modern world, we may not face the same physical hardships as the Manly Bennett party, but we still encounter situations that test our character and our commitment to others. The story of Manly and Rogers reminds us of the power of perseverance, the importance of keeping our promises, and the impact that selfless actions can have on the lives of others. It challenges us to consider: in our own lives, are we willing to go the extra mile for others, even when it's difficult or inconvenient? Let's remember that while the era of wagon trains and unexplored territories may be behind us, the spirit of exploration, courage, and mutual support that defined the best of that time is still relevant today. The story of the Death Valley 49ers, and particularly of William Lewis Manly and John Rogers, continues to inspire us to rise to our best selves in the face of adversity. Thank you for joining us on this journey through a remarkable chapter of American history. Until next time, keep exploring, keep persevering, and above all, keep looking out for one another. Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan for another Southwest tale. Please leave a like, comment, and share. For further desert adventures, hit the subscribe button. Hit the bell to be notified of new videos. If you would like to help support my channel, hit the super thanks heart icon on the bottom of the video and contribute. Happy trails!